The hallway outside courtroom 7 was cold and quiet, except for the soft ticking of the wall clock and the gentle swing of 8-year-old Ethan's sneakers against the wooden bench. His small hands gripped the edge of the seat, knuckles turning white. Next to him sat his father, Michael, a man with tired eyes and a week's worth of stubble that showed just how stressful the past months had been. "It's going to be okay, buddy," Michael whispered, placing his large hand over Ethan's tiny one. The boy nodded but didn't look up. His Spider-Man backpack sat between them, stuffed with his favorite comfort items, a worn teddy bear named Mr. Buttons and a dog-eared comic book. Across the hallway, Ethan's mother Rebecca sat straight-backed on an identical bench. She wore a neat blue dress and had her hair pulled back in a bun so tight it seemed to pull at her skin. Every few minutes she would check her phone, her fingers tapping nervously against the screen. Unlike Michael, she never looked at Ethan. The door to the courtroom opened, and a court officer stepped out. "Parker custody hearing will begin in 5 minutes," he announced, his voice echoing down the marble corridor. Ethan's stomach twisted into knots. He knew what today meant. The grown-ups kept using words like custody arrangement and testimony, but what they really meant was, who will you live with? Mom or Dad? His teacher, Mrs. Wilson, had explained it to him last week when he couldn't stop crying during math class. Sometimes, she had said, gently wiping his tears, judges need to decide what's best for children when their parents can't agree. But how could the judge know what was best? The judge didn't know about the scary nights at Mom's new apartment, or how Dad always made sure there was a nightlight, or how Mom's new friend looked at him with cold eyes when Mom wasn't watching. "All rise." The command pulled Ethan from his thoughts as they entered the courtroom. It was bigger than he had imagined, with high ceilings and rows of empty benches. At the front, behind a massive wooden desk, sat Judge Linda Thompson, her gray hair framing a face that looked both kind and serious at the same time. The lawyers began talking right away. Mom's lawyer, a thin man with glasses that kept sliding down his nose, showed pictures on a big screen. "These bruises," he said, pointing to photos of Ethan's arm, "appeared after a weekend with the father." Ethan bit his lip. Those weren't from Dad. Those were from when he fell off his bike, but Mom had told him to say something different. Dad's lawyer, a woman with curly hair and a soft voice, showed different pictures. Dad at Ethan's soccer games, helping with science fair projects, making dinner together. "Your Honor," Mom's lawyer continued, "the school counselor has noted significant behavioral changes in the child. Bedwetting, nightmares, reluctance to visit his father." Ethan felt his cheeks burn with shame. Those things were true, but not because of Dad. He hugged himself tightly, wishing he could disappear. As the morning dragged on, Ethan watched his parents avoid looking at each other. When Dad spoke, Mom shook her head. When Mom spoke, Dad sighed deeply. They had once laughed together at the dinner table and held hands on family walks. Now they couldn't even be in the same room without fighting. Judge Thompson listened carefully, sometimes writing notes, sometimes looking directly at Ethan. When their eyes met, she gave him a small, encouraging smile. Finally, after what felt like forever, Judge Thompson spoke. "I believe we need to hear from Ethan himself." Her voice was firm but gentle. "I understand this is unusual for a child his age, but given the conflicting accounts, I think it's necessary." The courtroom fell silent. All eyes turned to Ethan. "We'll take a short recess, and then I'd like to speak with Ethan in my chambers," Judge Thompson continued. "Just Ethan, myself, and the court-appointed child advocate." As everyone stood up, Ethan felt like his legs had turned to jelly. He was going to have to talk to the judge. He was going to have to tell her everything. And that scared him more than anything else in the world. When everyone returned to the courtroom after the short break, the air felt heavier than before. Ethan sat on the edge of his chair, his feet still not touching the ground. He could feel sweat forming on his palms as he watched the adults settle back into their places. Judge Thompson tapped her gavel once, bringing the room to complete silence. "We will now continue with the Parker custody hearing," she announced, her voice calm but commanding. She looked down at her notes, flipping through pages of what Ethan imagined were grown-up words about him. Rebecca's lawyer stood up first, straightening his tie as he approached a large easel covered with a cloth. "Your Honor, if I may present Exhibit C," he said, pulling away the cloth to reveal a poster-sized photo of Ethan's arm with a fading bruise near the elbow. Ethan's heart raced. He remembered that bruise. It happened when he tripped over the coffee table at Mom's apartment. But that wasn't what Mom had told him to say if anyone asked. This injury, the lawyer continued, pointing with a laser pointer, occurred during the weekend of April 12th, when the child was in Mr. Parker's care. He turned to face the judge. We have documentation from Ethan's pediatrician dated April 15th, the Monday after the visit. Ethan glanced at his dad, who was shaking his head slowly, his face growing pale. Dad looked so sad and confused that Ethan wanted to run over and hug him. Next came a school report. Ethan recognized his teacher's handwriting on the form projected onto the screen. The child has shown increasing withdrawal in class settings. When asked to participate in family-themed activities, he becomes visibly distressed. Ethan looked down at his shoes. He remembered that day in art class when they had to draw pictures of their families. He didn't know what to draw anymore. Should he include Mom's new friend? Should he draw 2 separate pictures? In the end, he just scribbled with a black crayon until the paper tore. Rebecca's lawyer continued for what felt like hours to Ethan, showing more pictures, more reports, and even playing a recording of Ethan's talk with the school counselor. Hearing his own voice in the courtroom made Ethan's stomach hurt. And finally, Your Honor, the lawyer said, Mrs. Parker has documented every instance of concerning behavior following visitations with the father. He handed a thick folder to the court clerk, who passed it to Judge Thompson. When Dad's lawyer stood up, Ethan felt a tiny bit of hope. Ms. Chen was shorter than Mom's lawyer, but she spoke clearly and didn't try to make her voice sound extra serious like he did. Your Honor, if I may, she said, walking toward a laptop connected to the courtroom screen. I'd like to present video evidence of Mr. Parker's interactions with his son. The screen lit up with a video from Ethan's last birthday party. There was Dad, helping him blow out candles, both of them laughing. Another clip showed them building a science project together, Dad patiently holding pieces while Ethan glued them in place. Mr. Parker has been a consistent, loving presence in Ethan's life, Ms. Chen said. These allegations of abuse are not only unfounded but contradict years of documented positive parenting. She called forward 3 witnesses: Ethan's soccer coach, his Sunday school teacher, and Dad's neighbor who sometimes babysat Ethan. They all said the same things: that Dad was patient, that Ethan was happy with him, that they never saw anything worrying. Throughout it all, Mom sat very still, sometimes whispering to her lawyer. When the soccer coach mentioned how Dad never missed a game, Mom's lips pressed into a thin line. Then something unexpected happened. The court-appointed child psychologist, Dr. Patel, stood up to speak. Ethan had met her twice in a room with toys and drawing supplies. She'd asked him questions while he played, not writing anything down until after he left. Your Honor, Dr. Patel said, her voice gentle but firm, I've spent time with Ethan on 2 separate occasions. While I haven't formed a complete clinical opinion, I must note that the child shows signs of significant emotional distress. She paused, looking directly at the judge. However, this distress intensifies markedly when discussing his mother's household, not his father's. This contradicts some of the evidence presented today. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Ethan saw his mother's face change color, and her lawyer leaned over to whisper something in her ear. Dad sat up straighter, hope flickering across his tired face. Judge Thompson raised her hand for silence, then looked directly at Ethan. Her eyes were kind but serious. I think, she said slowly, it's time we heard from Ethan himself. Ethan's legs felt wobbly as he walked toward the front of the courtroom. The lady with the kind smile, Mrs. Rivera, the court helper person, Ethan couldn't remember her real job title, held his hand gently. She had explained earlier that she was there to make sure everything was okay for kids in court. Would you like to sit here, Ethan? Judge Thompson pointed to a chair that had been placed next to her desk, higher than the regular chairs so Ethan could see everyone. Someone had put a blue cushion on it. Ethan nodded, not trusting his voice. He climbed onto the chair, his feet dangling. The judge seemed even taller up close, but her eyes were friendly behind her glasses. Now, Ethan, she said, her voice softer than when she talked to the grown-ups, I know this is scary, but everyone here just wants what's best for you. Do you understand? Ethan nodded again, then remembered Mrs. Rivera saying he should use words. Yes, ma'am, he whispered. Good boy. Judge Thompson smiled. I'm going to ask you some questions, and all you have to do is tell me the truth. Not what anyone told you to say, not what you think I want to hear, just the truth. Can you do that? I think so, Ethan said. He snuck a quick look at his parents. Dad was leaning forward in his seat, hands clasped together like he was praying. Mom was sitting very straight, her face looking like it was made of stone. Let's start with something easy, Judge Thompson said. Do you like school? Ethan thought about Ms. Wilson's class and his friends at lunch. Most days, I don't like math much. A few people in the courtroom chuckled softly, which made Ethan feel a little braver. I understand, the judge said with a small smile. Now I'm going to ask about things that might be harder to talk about. Remember, just the truth. She picked up a paper from her desk. Ethan, we've seen pictures of some bruises on your arm. Can you tell me how you got those? Ethan's throat felt tight. He looked at his mom, who was staring at him hard, her eyes saying, "Remember what I told you," without her having to speak. He started, then stopped. He looked at his dad, who just nodded encouragingly, worry lines on his forehead. I fell over the coffee table at Mom's, Ethan said finally, the words tumbling out. I was running inside even though we're not supposed to, and I tripped. The courtroom stayed quiet, but Ethan could feel the air change somehow. His mom's lawyer shuffled some papers loudly. I see, said Judge Thompson. And did you tell the doctor that when you went to see him? Ethan looked down at his hands. No. Mom said I should tell him that Dad pushed me. But Dad didn't. Dad never hurts me. Someone gasped. When Ethan looked up, he saw his mom's face had turned an angry red color. And what about these other marks? Judge Thompson gently showed him another photo, this one of a bruise on his back. That was from Mom's friend, Ethan said quietly. He got mad when I spilled juice on the carpet. He grabbed me really hard. Mom's friend? The judge asked. You mean Mr. Brian Thomas, who lives with your mother? Ethan nodded. He says I make too much noise and mess up the apartment. He gets really angry sometimes. Ethan's voice got even quieter, especially when he drinks the grown-up drinks. The judge wrote something down. Has Mr. Thomas hurt you other times? Ethan's eyes filled with tears. Sometimes he squeezes my arm really tight when Mom's not looking, or he pinches me where nobody can see. Once he pushed me into my room so hard I hit my head on the dresser. And did you tell anyone about this? Judge Thompson asked gently. I tried to tell Mom, Ethan said, a tear rolling down his cheek. But she said I was making up stories because I didn't like Brian. She said if I kept telling lies, Dad would get in trouble and have to go away forever. Judge Thompson's face stayed calm, but her knuckles turned white where she gripped her pen. So the things you told your school counselor about being afraid to go home. I meant Mom's home, Ethan interrupted, wiping his nose on his sleeve. I'm scared at Mom's house, but she told me to say it was Dad's house. She said nobody would believe me if I told about Brian. The judge looked at Mrs. Rivera, who nodded slightly. Then she turned back to Ethan. Ethan, this is very important, she said, leaning closer. Has your mother ever told you to say things that weren't true about your father? Ethan nodded, more tears coming now. Lots of times. She says things like, remember to tell them Daddy didn't feed you, or don't forget to say you were left alone. But it's not true. Dad always takes good care of me. He looked right at his mother then, his small shoulders straightening despite his tears. Mommy is lying, he said, his voice suddenly stronger. She's been lying about everything. The courtroom erupted with noise. Ethan's mom jumped to her feet, shouting something Ethan couldn't hear. Her lawyer tried to calm her down. Dad put his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking. The judge had to bang her gavel several times. Order. I will have order in my courtroom, Judge Thompson called out. When everyone quieted down, she turned back to Ethan, who was trembling. You've been very brave today, she said quietly. Very brave indeed. The courtroom fell into a stunned silence that lasted only a few heartbeats before chaos erupted again. Rebecca's face had drained of all color, her mouth opening and closing without words coming out. Michael looked just as shocked, his eyes wide with disbelief as he stared at his son. I need to continue this conversation with Ethan privately, Judge Thompson announced firmly, her voice cutting through the commotion. She nodded to Mrs. Rivera, who gently helped Ethan down from the chair. We will take a 30-minute recess. When we return, I expect complete composure from everyone present." As Mrs. Rivera led Ethan toward a side door, he glanced back over his shoulder. His mom was arguing with her lawyer, her hands moving wildly as she spoke. His dad just sat there looking stunned, like someone had hit him with a baseball bat. The judge's private room was nothing like Ethan had imagined. Instead of being scary and dark like a principal's office, it had a small round table with colorful chairs, a bookshelf with children's books, and a box of toys in the corner. There was even a fish tank with bright orange fish swimming lazily around plastic plants. "Would you like some water, Ethan?" Judge Thompson asked, pouring herself a glass from a pitcher on her desk. Ethan nodded. His throat felt dry after all the talking. Mrs. Rivera brought him a paper cup of water, and he drank it all in one big gulp. "What happens now?" Ethan asked, his voice small. "Is Mom gonna be really mad at me?" Judge Thompson sat down in one of the colorful chairs, making herself closer to Ethan's height. "What happens now is that we make sure you're safe. That's the most important thing." "But I got Mom in trouble," Ethan whispered, tears welling up again. Even though his mom had made him lie, even though she hadn't protected him from Brian, she was still his mom. A part of him still loved her and didn't want bad things to happen to her. "You didn't get anyone in trouble, Ethan," Mrs. Rivera said gently, sitting in another chair. "You told the truth. That's exactly what you were supposed to do." Judge Thompson nodded. "Adults are responsible for their own actions. Your mom and Brian made choices, and now they have to face the consequences of those choices. None of that is your fault." Ethan picked at a loose thread on his shirt. "Will I still get to see Mom?" The judge and Mrs. Rivera exchanged looks. "We'll need to figure out what's safest for you right now," Judge Thompson said carefully. "But I want you to know that no matter what happens, lots of people care about you and want to help you." There was a soft knock at the door, and Dr. Patel, the child psychologist, entered. She smiled warmly at Ethan. "Hi there, Ethan. Mind if I join you?" Ethan shook his head. He liked Dr. Patel. In her office, she had let him play with kinetic sand while they talked, not making him sit still like other grown-ups did. "Ethan," Dr. Patel said, pulling up a chair, "I'm so proud of how brave you were in there. Can you tell me a little more about what happens at your mom's house with Brian? When did it start?" Ethan took a deep breath. Now that he had started telling the truth, it felt like he couldn't stop. The words poured out of him. "It started after Christmas. Brian moved in, and at first he was nice to me. But then he started getting mad about everything. He doesn't like kids. He told Mom that when he thought I couldn't hear. He said I was spoiled and needed discipline." Ethan explained how Brian would wait until his mom was in the shower or on the phone to hurt him, how he'd threatened to hurt Ethan worse if he told anyone, how his mom didn't believe him when he tried to tell her, and how she started telling him to blame his dad instead. "She said if I told what Brian did, nobody would believe me because I'm just a kid," Ethan said, his voice getting stronger as he spoke. "She said they'd think I was making it up, and then I'd have to go live in a foster home where nobody would love me." As Ethan talked, Dr. Patel took notes, occasionally asking gentle questions to clarify something. Judge Thompson's face grew more serious with each new detail, while Mrs. Rivera sometimes reached over to pat Ethan's hand reassuringly. "What about these nightmares your school counselor mentioned?" Dr. Patel asked. "I have bad dreams about Brian," Ethan admitted. "In the dreams, he locks me in the closet, and nobody can hear me yelling." He shuddered. "He did that once for real, when Mom went to the grocery store." Judge Thompson stood up suddenly, her face tight with anger, though Ethan could tell it wasn't directed at him. "I've had enough," she said. She looked at Mrs. Rivera. "Call Officer Wilkins. I want Brian Thomas brought in for questioning immediately." She turned to Dr. Patel. "Would you please stay with Ethan while I go make some calls? I'm issuing an emergency protective order." The grown-ups spoke quickly to each other, using big words Ethan didn't fully understand, but he caught phrases like immediate removal and temporary custody and criminal charges. It all sounded very serious. Judge Thompson knelt down in front of Ethan before she left the room. "Ethan, I promise you won't have to go back to that apartment with Brian. You were right to tell us the truth today. It took incredible courage." After the judge left, Mrs. Rivera brought Ethan a sandwich and some apple slices from a small refrigerator in the corner. He hadn't realized how hungry he was until he saw the food. "What's going to happen to my mom?" he asked Dr. Patel as he munched on an apple slice. Dr. Patel's voice was gentle but honest. "Your mom made some very serious mistakes, Ethan. She'll need to talk to the judge and maybe other people about what happened. She might need some help to learn how to be a better mom." "And Brian?" "Ryan will be in a lot of trouble for hurting you," Dr. Patel said firmly. "What he did was wrong and against the law." As Ethan finished his sandwich, he felt strangely lighter, like a heavy backpack had been taken off his shoulders. For the first time in months, he didn't have to remember what lies to tell or worry about making Brian angry. He didn't have to be afraid anymore. "Can I go see my dad now?" he asked. Mrs. Rivera smiled at him. "Soon, Ethan, very soon." When Judge Thompson returned to the courtroom, her face was more serious than before. Everyone could feel the change in the air, like when the sky turns dark before a big storm. Michael sat up straighter, hope and worry fighting for space on his tired face. Rebecca's lawyer was whispering urgently in her ear, but she wasn't listening. Her eyes were fixed on the door where Ethan had gone. "In light of the testimony we've heard today," Judge Thompson began, her voice steady and strong, "I am ordering an immediate investigation into the allegations made by Ethan Parker regarding abuse in his mother's home." She turned to look directly at Rebecca. "Mrs. Parker, effective immediately, your son will be placed in temporary custody with his father while this investigation proceeds." Rebecca jumped to her feet. "You can't do that. He's lying." Michael put him up to this. "Sit down, Mrs. Parker," the judge cut in sharply. "One more outburst, and I'll hold you in contempt of court." Rebecca slowly sank back into her chair, her hands shaking. "Furthermore," Judge Thompson continued, "I'm issuing a restraining order against Brian Thomas, prohibiting him from any contact with Ethan. Detective William Fletcher from the Family Crimes Unit has been assigned to investigate these claims." The judge looked at the court reporter. "The full transcript of today's proceedings will be made available to Detective Fletcher by end of business today." Michael's lawyer leaned over to whisper something to him, and he nodded, wiping at his eyes with the back of his hand. Judge Thompson spoke directly to Michael next. "Mr. Parker, while I understand today's revelations have been shocking for you as well, I expect you to cooperate fully with the investigation. Ethan will need extra support during this time." "Yes, Your Honor," Michael said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Whatever Ethan needs." "Mrs. Rivera will coordinate with both Detective Fletcher and Dr. Patel to ensure Ethan receives appropriate counseling. We will reconvene in 2 weeks to assess the situation." With a final tap of her gavel, the judge ended the hearing. As people began filing out of the courtroom, Officer Pete Wilkins, a tall man with kind eyes who specialized in family cases, approached Rebecca. "Mrs. Parker, I need you to come with me to answer some questions." "Am I under arrest?" Rebecca asked, her voice suddenly small. "Not at this time, ma'am," Officer Wilkins replied. "But we do need your cooperation regarding the allegations against Mr. Thomas." Michael watched as Officer Wilkins led Rebecca away, feeling a complicated mix of anger, sadness, and relief. How had things gone so wrong? He and Rebecca had once loved each other enough to create a family together. Now she had chosen a man who hurt their son over her own child's safety. A door opened and Mrs. Rivera appeared with Ethan. The boy looked exhausted, his eyes red-rimmed from crying, but when he saw his dad, his face lit up. "Dad." Ethan broke away from Mrs. Rivera and ran across the now empty courtroom. Michael knelt down and caught his son in a tight hug, lifting him off the ground. "I'm so proud of you, buddy," he whispered, his voice breaking. So proud." Detective Fletcher approached them, introducing himself with a gentle handshake for Ethan. "I know today has been really tough," he said, crouching down to the boy's level. "But I promise I'm going to make sure nothing like this happens to you again." He turned to Michael. "Sir, I'll need to speak with Ethan again tomorrow, but for now, take him home and let him rest. Here's my card if anything comes up before then." As Michael drove Ethan home, the boy was unusually quiet, staring out the window at the passing trees. "You doing okay back there?" Michael asked, catching Ethan's eye in the rearview mirror. Ethan shrugged. "Is Mom going to jail?" Michael chose his words carefully. "I don't know yet, buddy. The police need to figure out exactly what happened. But no matter what, it's not your fault." What about Brian? Michael gripped the steering wheel tighter, trying to keep his voice steady. Brian will probably be in big trouble. What he did to you was very wrong. They pulled into the driveway of Michael's small house. It wasn't fancy, just a simple 3-bedroom with a backyard, but it was safe. As they walked to the door, Michael's elderly neighbor, Mrs. Jensen, waved from her garden. "That boy looks like he could use some of my chocolate chip cookies," she called. "I'll bring some over in a bit." Inside, Ethan made a beeline for his room, the one place that had remained constant through all the chaos of the past year. His dinosaur sheets were still on the bed, his Lego creations still lined the shelves, and his stuffed tiger Max still waited faithfully on his pillow. Michael followed him in and sat on the edge of the bed. "Want to talk about it?" Ethan flopped down beside him. "I kept thinking Mum would stop Brian," he said, his voice small. "Or that she'd believe me when I told her." "Why didn't she believe me, Dad?" Michael put his arm around Ethan's shoulders, pulling him close. "Sometimes grown-ups make really bad choices, especially when they're scared or confused. Your mom, she made some very bad choices, but that doesn't mean she doesn't love you." "But she let him hurt me," Ethan whispered. "I know, buddy," Michael said, his heart breaking all over again. "And that was terribly, terribly wrong. Nothing can excuse that." They sat in silence for a while, until a gentle knock at the front door announced Mrs. Jensen's arrival with her promised cookies. The smell of chocolate filled the house as Michael made hot chocolate to go with them. As evening fell, Michael helped Ethan get ready for bed, tucking him in with extra care. "Dad," Ethan asked sleepily as Michael turned out the light, "do I have to see Mom tomorrow?" "No, not tomorrow," Michael assured him. "Not until you're ready, and not until the judge says it's okay." "Good," Ethan mumbled, already drifting off. "I just want to stay here with you for a while." Michael sat in the dark beside his son's bed long after Ethan had fallen asleep, watching the gentle rise and fall of his chest. Tomorrow would bring police interviews, more questions, and the beginning of a long road to healing. But tonight, at least, Ethan was safe. And for now, that was enough. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity. Detective Fletcher became a regular visitor at Michael's house, sometimes bringing along his partner, Detective Grace Wong. They were kind but thorough, asking Ethan to go over his story again and again, looking for any inconsistencies or details he might have forgotten. "You're doing great, Ethan," Detective Wong told him after a particularly long session. "I know it's hard to keep talking about these things." Ethan just nodded, exhausted. He'd been having trouble sleeping, often waking up from nightmares about Brian finding him. On those nights, Michael would sit with him until he fell back asleep, sometimes even camping out on Ethan's floor in a sleeping bag, just in case the bad dreams come back. Dr. Patel came 3 times a week for therapy sessions. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they played games, and sometimes they just drew pictures together. She taught Ethan ways to calm himself down when he started feeling scared or angry, like counting backward from 10 while taking deep breaths, or imagining himself in his favorite safe place. "Your brain is like a muscle," she explained. "It got hurt, and now we're helping it heal. Just like you do exercises if you broke your leg." One rainy afternoon, while Ethan was at his therapy session, Detective Fletcher called Michael to share some news. "We've been investigating Brian Thomas," he said, his voice serious. "And we found some disturbing things. He has a history of domestic violence charges from a previous relationship. His ex-girlfriend just came forward after hearing about Ethan's case." Michael gripped the phone tighter. "What about Rebecca? Did she know?" There was a pause on the line. "We're not sure yet, but there's more. We got a warrant to search their apartment and check their electronic devices." Michael's heart pounded as Detective Fletcher continued. "We found text messages between them discussing how to handle Ethan's big mouth and how to coach him on what to say about you. There are messages where she acknowledges that Brian was disciplining Ethan physically, but argues it wasn't that bad." Michael had to sit down, his legs suddenly weak. "So she knew he was hurting our son." "It appears that way," Detective Fletcher confirmed. "We're bringing Brian in for formal questioning today. Rebecca is coming in tomorrow." After hanging up, Michael sat at the kitchen table, trying to process everything. How could Rebecca have let this happen? The woman he married, the mother of his child, how could she choose a man who hurt their son? He was still sitting there when Mrs. Rivera dropped Ethan off after his therapy session. The boy came in clutching a drawing he'd made, his face brighter than it had been in days. "Dad, look what I made." Ethan held up the paper proudly. It showed a house with a sun overhead and 2 stick figures in the yard, one tall, one small. "It's our house. Dr. Patel said I could draw my safe place, and I picked here with you." Michael's eyes filled with tears as he hugged his son. "I love it, buddy. Let's put it on the fridge." Later that evening, as they were eating dinner, Ethan looked up from his spaghetti. "Dad, did the police know if Brian is going to jail yet?" Michael put down his fork. "They're talking to him today. The police found some important evidence that shows he did hurt you, and that your mom," he hesitated, "that your mom knew about it." Ethan pushed his food around his plate. "Is she going to jail too?" "I don't know yet," Michael answered honestly. "The police need to talk to her first." Ethan was quiet for a long time. "I still love Mom," he finally said in a small voice. "Even though she did a bad thing, is that okay?" Michael reached across the table and squeezed Ethan's hand. "Of course it's okay. You can love someone even when they make terrible mistakes. That doesn't mean what they did was right." 2 days later, Officer Wilkins called to inform them that both Brian and Rebecca had been arrested. Brian was charged with child abuse and Rebecca with child endangerment and accessory to abuse. The news made the local paper, though they didn't print Ethan's name because he was a minor. Michael tried to shield Ethan from the worst of it, but kids at school had heard things. Ethan came home crying one day because a boy had called him a snitch on the playground. "Why am I the bad guy?" Ethan sobbed into Michael's shirt. "I didn't do anything wrong." "You're not the bad guy," Michael said firmly, holding his son close. "You're the bravest person I know. Those kids don't understand what happened." The next morning, Michael met with Ethan's teacher and the school principal. They agreed to have a counselor talk to the class about bullying and the importance of speaking up when someone is being hurt, without sharing any details about Ethan's specific situation. The morning of the follow-up court hearing, Michael helped Ethan pick out his clothes, a button-up shirt and khaki pants that were a little too big because he'd grown since they bought them. "Do I have to see Mom and Brian?" Ethan asked nervously as Michael combed his hair. "No, buddy. Brian is not allowed anywhere near you. And you'll only see Mom if the judge decides it's okay and you want to." "I don't know if I want to," Ethan admitted. "Not yet." "That's completely up to you," Michael assured him. "No one will make you do anything you're not ready for." Mrs. Rivera met them at the courthouse, giving Ethan a warm smile and a small stuffed dog. "This is Brave," she told him. "He goes to court with kids who have to talk to the judge. He's very good at helping them stay calm." Ethan clutched the little dog as they walked into the courtroom, his other hand firmly in his father's. Judge Thompson was already at her desk, and she gave Ethan a kind nod when she saw him. "Good morning, Ethan," she said. "I'm happy to see you again. And who's your friend?" She pointed to the stuffed dog. "This is Brave," Ethan said shyly. "He helps kids in court." "Well, I'm very glad Brave could join us today," Judge Thompson said with a smile. "We could all use a little extra bravery sometimes." As the hearing began, Michael squeezed Ethan's hand. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. 6 months had passed since that day in court when Ethan found the courage to speak the truth. The leaves had changed colors, fallen to the ground, and now spring flowers were pushing up through the soil in the small garden behind Michael's house. Life had settled into a new kind of normal. This morning was special, Ethan's 9th birthday. Michael had spent half the night decorating the living room with superhero balloons and streamers. The kitchen counter was covered with wrapped presents, and a homemade cake waited in the refrigerator. "Dad, you did all this?" Ethan stood in the doorway in his pajamas, eyes wide with wonder. The morning sunlight caught in his hair, which had grown longer over the winter. "Happy birthday, buddy." Michael swept him up in a bear hug, surprised at how much heavier his son had gotten. Soon he wouldn't be able to lift him anymore. "Is Grandma and Grandpa coming?" Ethan asked, reaching for a chocolate chip pancake from the stack on the table. "They'll be here at noon," Michael confirmed, "and Mrs. Jensen is bringing her famous cookies. Dr. Patel might stop by too. She said she has a special present for you." Ethan smiled, drizzling maple syrup over his pancakes. I like Dr. Patel. She doesn't make me talk about stuff if I don't want to anymore. Michael nodded, grateful for the skilled therapist who had helped guide Ethan through the darkest days after the trial. Those first few months had been brutally hard. Brian had eventually pleaded guilty to reduced charges in exchange for testifying against Rebecca. He was sentenced to 4 years in prison. Rebecca's case had been more complicated. After initially denying everything, she'd broken down during police questioning, admitting she had known about the abuse but had been too afraid of losing Brian to stop it. In the end, she'd received 2 years of probation and lost all custody rights to Ethan, with only the possibility of supervised visits after completing extensive therapy and parenting classes. So far, she hadn't asked for any visits. Michael wasn't sure if that was good or bad for Ethan's healing, but Dr. Patel had advised letting Ethan set the pace for any reconciliation. "Can I open one present before everyone gets here?" Ethan asked, interrupting Michael's thoughts. "Just one," Michael agreed. "Pick carefully." Ethan studied the pile before choosing a small package wrapped in comic book paper. He tore it open to find a shiny metal whistle on a cord. "It's for emergencies," Michael explained. "You put it around your neck, and if you ever feel scared or need help, you blow it as hard as you can." Ethan examined it closely. "But I'm not scared anymore, Dad." Michael smiled, his heart swelling with pride at his son's resilience. "I know, buddy, but sometimes it helps to know you have a way to call for help if you need it." Ethan slipped the cord over his head, tucking the whistle under his shirt. "Thanks, Dad." By noon, the small house was buzzing with visitors. Ethan's grandparents arrived with armloads of presents. Mrs. Jensen brought not only cookies but also a hand-knitted sweater. Ethan's best friend from school, Denny, came with his parents. Even Officer Wilkins stopped by briefly, bringing a junior police badge that made Ethan's eyes light up. "The birthday boy needs to make a wish," Michael called out as he carried the cake to the table. 9 candles flickered in the darkened room as everyone sang. Ethan closed his eyes tight, took a deep breath, and blew. Every candle went out, and the room erupted in cheers. "What did you wish for?" Danny asked eagerly. "Can't tell, or it won't come true," Ethan replied, looking wiser than his 9 years. Later, as the party wound down and most of the guests had left, Judge Thompson arrived. She didn't normally attend the birthday parties of children from her cases, but Ethan's situation had affected her deeply. The protocols she'd implemented in her courtroom following his case had already helped 3 other children speak up about hidden abuse. "I have something for you," she told Ethan, handing him an envelope. "It's not really a present, more of an update." Inside was a letter explaining that the family court had made the custody arrangement permanent. Michael now had sole legal custody of Ethan. If Rebecca completed all her required programs, she could petition for supervised visitation, but the decision would ultimately be Ethan's. "Does this mean I never have to go back to Mom's?" Ethan asked, not fully understanding the legal terms. "It means you get to stay with your dad," Judge Thompson explained gently. "And you only have to see your mom if and when you're ready." Ethan nodded, processing this information. "I'm still mad at her," he admitted. "But sometimes I miss her too. Is that weird?" "Not weird at all," Judge Thompson assured him. "Feelings are complicated, especially when someone you love hurts you." After the judge left, Michael and Ethan sat on the porch swing, watching the sun begin to set. The yard was littered with popped balloons and wrapping paper they'd clean up tomorrow. "Good birthday?" Michael asked, his arm around his son's shoulders. "The best," Ethan replied, leaning against his dad. Then, after a moment of quiet, he added, "Dad, do you think someday I might want to see Mom again?" Michael took a deep breath. "I think that's something only you can decide, when and if you're ready. But whatever you choose, I'll be right here with you." Ethan fingered the whistle beneath his shirt. "I don't think I need this anymore, but I'll keep it anyway." "Why's that?" Michael asked. "Because," Ethan said thoughtfully, "it reminds me that it's okay to ask for help when someone's hurting you. That's what I did in court, right? I asked for help." Michael pulled his son closer, his throat tight with emotion. "That's exactly what you did. And it was the bravest thing I've ever seen." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Ethan slowly drifted to sleep against his father's shoulder, safe and secure. The journey had been unimaginably difficult, but watching his son's peaceful face, Michael knew they had made it through the worst. Justice had prevailed because one small voice had found the courage to tell the truth, a truth that had left an entire courtroom speechless, but ultimately set Ethan free.